Welcome again to my channel. This is Trev from Trevessence, and today we are going to continue the reading of the book Spare by Prince Harry. For those of you who are just joining me, if you have not read the book, you can go back and listen to the other readings we have done. I think today is going to be number 6 or 7. But thanks to those of you who have been following us since we started reading this book. I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am enjoying bringing it to you. Now let us pick up where we left off. We left off at chapter 48. So I'm going to read the last paragraph of 48 before we move over into 49. There are published reports that Willie and I snuck out of the church and hung "Just Married" signs on their car. I don't think so. I might have hung a sign, "Be Happy," if I thought of it at the time. I do remember watching him drive off and thinking, they're happy. They're really happy. Damn, I'd like all of us to be happy. 49. Around this time, just before the wedding, or perhaps just after, I went off with Willie to train with the British Special Boat Services. It wasn't official training, but a bit of boys and toys, as we called it. Mostly a lark, though it did grow out of long-standing and solemn tradition. Our family had always maintained close ties with the British military. Sometimes that meant an official visit, sometimes a casual lunch. Sometimes it meant a private chat with men and women home from the wars. But sometimes it meant taking part in rigorous exercises. Nothing showed respect for the military like doing or trying to do what they did. Such exercises were always kept sacred from the press. The military preferred it that way, and God knows the royals did too. It was Mummy who took Willie and me on our first military exercise, a killing horse, in Hertfordshire. The three of us were put into a room, told not to move. Then the room went dark. A squad kicked down the door. They threw flashbangs, scared the devil out of us, which was their aim. They wanted to teach us how to respond if ever our lives were in danger. If ever? That made us laugh. Have you seen our mail? But this day with Willie was different. Much more physical, more participatory, less about teaching, more about adrenaline. We raced across Poole Harbor on speedboats. Attached, a frigate clambered up its cable ladders while shooting 9mm MP5s loaded with paintball rounds. In one exercise, we scurried down a flight of metal stairs into the frigate's hold. Someone cut the lights to make it more interesting, I suppose. In the pitch dark, 4 steps from the bottom, I fell, landed on my left knee, which was immediately impaled on a fixed bolt sticking out of the floor. Hey, Jojo. Good morning, Joe. What's up? How are you doing? Good to see you, my love. As always, it's always a pleasure spending my mornings with you. Let us continue. Blinding pain washed over me. I managed to get up, keep going, finish the drill. But at the end of the exercise, we jumped off the boat's helipad into the water, and I found my knee wasn't working. My whole leg wasn't working. When I got out of the water and stripped off the dry suit, Willie looked down and turned pale. My knee was gushing blood. Paramedics were there within minutes. The palace announced some weeks later that my entry into the army would be postponed indefinitely. Reporters demanded to know why. The Palace Comms team told them Prince Harry has injured his knee playing rugby. Reading the papers, my leg iced and elevated. I threw back my head and laughed. I couldn't help savoring one small particle of self-indulgent glee as the papers, for once, unwittingly printed a lie about me. They soon got their revenge, however. They began pushing a story that I was afraid to go into the army, that I was bunking off, using a fake knee injury as a way of stalling. I was, they said, a coward. 50. One of Willie's friends was having a birthday party in the countryside near Gloucester. More than a birthday party, it was a fancy dress party with a cringy theme. Natives and colonials. Guests were required to dress accordingly. January 2005. I didn't love fancy dress parties, and I couldn't stand themes. For Willie's last birthday, or the one before, he had had a fancy dress party with a theme. Out of Africa, I found it irritating and baffling. Every time I had gone to Africa, I had worn shorts and a t-shirt, maybe a kikoi. Would that do, Willie? But this was magnitude's worst. Not one item of native or colonial garb hung in my wardrobe. I was crashing with Pa and Camilla, some days at St. James, some days at Highgrove, largely living out of a suitcase. So I didn't give a damn about clothes. I looked most days as if I'd got dressed in a very dark and disordered closet. A fancy dress party, therefore, with a theme, was a nightmare. Pass. Hard pass. Willie, however, insisted. We'll find you something to wear, Harold. His new girlfriend promised to help. I liked his new girlfriend. She was carefree, sweet, kind. She had done a gap year in Florence, knew about photography, art, and clothes. She loved clothes. Her name was Kate. I forget what native or colonial thing she was wearing to the party, but with her help, Willie had chosen for himself some kind of feline outfit, skin-tight leopard with, am I remembering this correctly, a springy, bouncy tail. He tried it on for us, and he looked like a cross between Tigger and Baryshnikov. Kate and I had a great time pointing our fingers at him and rolling around on the floor. It was ridiculous, especially in a three-way mirror. But ridiculous, they both said, was the point of the upcoming party. I like seeing Kate laugh. Better yet, I like making her laugh, and I was quite good at it. My transparently silly side connected with her heavily disguised silly side. Whenever I worried that Kate was going to be the one to take Willie from me, I consoled myself with thoughts of all our future laughing fits together, and I told myself how great everything would be when I had a serious girlfriend who could laugh along with us. Maybe it would be Chelsea. Maybe, I thought, I can make Kate laugh with my costume. But that would be it. What's Harold going to be? This became our constant topic. On the day of the party, it was decided that I'd go to a nearby village, Nailsworth, where there was a well-known costume shop. Surely I could find something there. It's a bit blurry, though some things come back with total certainty. The shop had an unforgettable smell. I remember its musty, moldy funk with an underment of something else, something indefinable, something some airborne product of a tightly sealed room, containing hundreds of pairs of trousers, shared over several decades by thousands of humans. I went up and down the rows, sifting through the racks, seeing nothing I liked. With time running out, I narrowed my options to two: a British pilot's uniform and a sand-colored Nazi uniform with a swastika armband and a flat cap. I phoned Willie and Kate, asked what they thought. Nazi uniform, they said. I rented it, plus a silly mustache, and went back to the house. I tried it all on. They both howled. Worse than Willie's leopard outfit. They were ridiculous. Which again was the point. But the mustache needed trimming, so I snipped the long bits on the ends, made it a proper Hitler Mauser, then added in some cargo trousers. Off we went to the party, where no one looked twice at my costume. All the natives and colonials were more focused on getting drunk and groping each other. No one took any notice of me, which I put down as a small win. Someone, however, snapped photos. Days later, this someone saw a chance to make some cash or some trouble and sought out a reporter. How much for snaps from a recent party attended by royals? The crown jewel of the photos was thought to be Willie in his leopard, but the reporter spotted something else. Hello, what's this? The spare? As a Nazi? There was some haggling over price, according to reports I'd heard. A sum of £5,000 was agreed upon, and weeks later, the photo appeared in every paper in the known world, beneath Titanic headlines. Hail, Harry! Here, aberrant! Royal hail to pay! What followed was a firestorm, which I thought at times would engulf me, and I felt that I deserved to be engulfed. There were moments over the course of the next several weeks and months when I thought I might die of shame. The typical response to the photos was, what could he have been thinking? The simplest answer was, I wasn't. When I saw those photos, I recognized immediately that my brain had been shut off, that perhaps it had been shut off for some time. I wanted to go around Britain knocking on doors, explaining to people I wasn't thinking. I meant no harm, but it wouldn't have made any difference. Hey, AG, hey, Jordan. Judgment was swift, harsh. I was either a crypto-Nazi or else a mental defective. I turned to Willie. He was sympathetic, but there wasn't much to say. Then I phoned Pa. To my surprise, he was serene. At first, I was suspicious. I thought maybe he was seeing my crisis as another opportunity to bolster his PR. But he spoke to me with such tenderness, such genuine compassion, that I was disarmed and grateful. He didn't gloss over the facts. Darling boy, how could you be so foolish? My cheeks burned. I know. But he quickly went on to say that it was the foolishness of youth, that he remembered being publicly vilified for youthful sins, and it wasn't fair, because youth is the time when you are by definition unfinished. You are still growing, still becoming, still learning, he said. He didn't specifically cite any of his youthful humiliations, but I knew. His most intimate conversations had been leaked. His most ill-conceived remarks had been trumpeted. Past girlfriends had been interrogated. Their rating of his lovemaking spread across tabloids, even books. He knew all about humiliation. He promised that the fury about this would blow over. The shame would fade. I loved him for that promise, even though, or maybe because, I knew it to be false. The shame would never fade, nor should it. Day after day, the scandal grew. I was excoriated in newspapers, on radio, on TV. Members of Parliament called for my head on a spike. One said I should be barred from entering Sandhurst. The blowing over, therefore, according to Pa's staff, would need some help. I'd need to make some sort of public atonement. Fine by me, I said. Sooner, sooner the better. So Pa sent me to a holy man. How is everybody doing this morning? Hope everybody's having a great Wednesday morning. It's Wednesday Hump Day, and it's also Reading Harry Book Spare Day. So we are going to continue reading. And there is my buddy AG from AG Born Jamaican is in the house. How are you doing, my love? So good to see you. Thank you all so much for coming, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button and share out the live so that people can listen to me while I read live. I know a lot of people would rather be here while I'm reading than having to come back and listen to it. But either way, we are going to continue reading. We're on to chapter 51. Bearded, bespectacled, with a deeply lined face and dark, wide eyes, he was chief rabbi of Britain. That much I had been told, but right away I could see he was much more. An eminent scholar, a religious philosopher, a prolific writer with more than 24 books to his name. He had spent many of his days staring out of windows and thinking about the rude causes of sorrow, of evil, of hate. He offered me a cup of tea, then dived straight in. He didn't mince words. He condemned my actions. He wasn't unkind, but it had to be done. There was no way around it. He also plays my stupidity in historical context. He spoke about the 6 million, the annihilated, Jews, Poles, dissenters, intellectuals, homosexuals, children, babies, old people turned to ash and smoke. A few short decades ago, I'd arrived at his house feeling shame. I now felt something else, a bottomless self-loathing. But that wasn't the rabbi's aim. That certainly wasn't how he wanted me to leave him. He urged me not to be devastated by my mistake, but instead to be motivated. He spoke to me with the quality one often encounters in truly wise people: forgiveness. He assured me that people do stupid things, say stupid things, but it doesn't need to be their intrinsic nature. I was showing my true nature, he said, by seeking to atone, seeking absolution. To the extent that he was able and qualified, he absolved me. He gave me grace. He told me to lift my head, go forth, use this experience to make the world better, to become a teacher of this event. Henners, I thought, would have liked the sound of that. Henners with his love of teaching. No matter what I did, the calls grew louder for me to be barred from the army. The top brass, however, were holding fast. If Prince Harry had been in the army when he drove himself up in the fervor, they said, he had been disciplined. But he's not in the army yet, they added, so he's perfectly free to be a thicko. 52. He was on to be our new private secretary. Jamie Lothar Pinkerton was his name, but I don't remember Willie and me referring to him as anything other than JLP. We should have just called him Marco II, or maybe Marco II. He was meant to be Marco's replacement, but also a more official, more detailed, more permanent version of our dear friend. All the things Marco had been doing informally, the minding and guiding and advising, JLP would now do formally, we were told. In fact, it was Marco who had found JLP and recommended him to Pa, and then trained him. So we already trusted the man, right from the start. He came with that all-important seal of approval. Marco said he was a good man. Deeply calm, slightly stiff, JLP wore shiny gold cufflinks and a gold signet ring, symbols of his probity, constancy, and stalwart belief in a certain kind of steadfast style. You always got the sense that, even on the morning of Armageddon, JLP would button in these amulets before leaving the house. Despite his spit and polish, however, his eminent exterior, JLP was a force, the product of Britain's finest military training, which meant, among other things, that he didn't deal with bullshit. He didn't give in, didn't take it, and anyone far and wide seemed to know. When British officials decided to launch a massive offensive against a Colombian drug dealer, they, they chose JLP to lead it. When the actor Ewan McGregor decided to make a 3-month motorbike trip through Mongolia and Siberia and Ukraine, for which he had required survival training, he turned to JLP. To me, JLP's finest trait was his reverence for truth, his expertise in truth. He was the opposite of so many people in government and working in the palace. So, not long after he started working for Willie and me, I asked him to get me some truth in the form of the secret police files on Mummy's crash. He looked down, looked away. Yes, he worked for Willie and me, but he cared about us too, and he cared about tradition, chain of command. My request seemed to jeopardize all three. He grimaced and furrowed his brow. An amorphous area, since JLP didn't have a lot of hair. Finally, he smoothed back the charcoal bristles remaining on each side and said that, were he to procure a said files, it would be very upsetting for me. Very upsetting indeed, Harry. Yes, I know. Sort of the point. He nodded. I see. A few days later, he brought me into a tiny office up a back staircase in St. James Palace and handed me a brown do not bend envelope. He said he had decided against showing me all the police files. He had gone through and removed the more challenging ones for your sake, he said. I was frustrated, but I didn't argue. If JLP didn't think I could handle them, then I probably couldn't. I thanked him for protecting me. He said he'd leave me to it, then walked out. I took several breaths, opened the file. Exterior photos outside the tunnel in which the crash occurred. Looking into the mouth of the tunnel, interior photos, a few feet inside the tunnel, deep interior photos, well inside the tunnel, looking down the tunnel and out the other end. Finally, close-ups of the smashed Mercedes, which was said to have entered the tunnel around midnight and never emerged in one piece. All seemed to be police photos, but then I realized that many, if not most, were from Paps and other photographers at the scene. The Paris police had seized their cameras. Some photos were taken moments after the crash, some much later. Some showed police officers walking about, others showed onlookers milling and gawping. All gave a sense of chaos, a disgraceful carnival atmosphere. Now came more detailed photos, clearer, closer, inside the Mercedes. There was the lifeless body of Mummy's friend, whom I now knew to be her boyfriend. There was her bodyguard, who had survived the crash, though it left him with gruesome injuries. And there was the driver, slumped over the wheel. He was blamed by many for the crash, because there was allegedly alcohol in his blood, and because he was dead and couldn't answer. At last, I came to the photos of Mummy. There were lights around her, auras, almost halos. How strange. The color of the lights was the same color as her hair, golden. I didn't know what the lights were. I couldn't imagine, though I came up with all sorts of supernatural explanations. As I realized their true origin, my stomach clenched. Flashes. There were flashes. And within some of the flashes were ghostly images, ghostly visages, and half visages, paps and reflected paps on all the smooth metal surfaces and glass windscreens. Those men wouldn't who had chased her, they had never stopped shooting her while she lay between the seats, unconscious or semi-conscious, and in their frenzy, they had sometimes accidentally photographed each other. Not one of them was checking on her, offering her help, not even comforting her. They were just shooting, shooting, shooting. I hadn't known. I hadn't dreamed. I'd been told that Pops chased Mommy, that they had hunted her like a pack of wild dogs, but I'd never dared to imagine that, like wild dogs, they had also feasted on her defenseless body. I hadn't been aware before this moment that the last thing Mommy saw on this earth was a flashbulb. Unless now I looked much closer at Mummy. No visible injuries. She was slumped out of it, but generally fine. Better than fine. Her dark blazer, her glowing hair, her radiant skin. Doctors at the hospital where she was taken couldn't stop remarking how beautiful she was. I stared, trying to make myself cry, but I couldn't because she was so lovely and so alive. Maybe the photos JLP held back were more definitive. Maybe they showed death in plainer terms, but I didn't consider that possibility too closely. I slammed the folder shut and said, "She's hiding." I requested this file because I sought proof, and the file proved nothing except that Mummy was in a car crash, after which she looked generally unharmed, while those who chased her continued to harass her. That was all. Rather than proof, I discovered more reasons for rage. In that little office, seated before that wretched "do not bend" envelope, the red mist came down, and it wasn't a mist, it was a torrent. Thank you for being here, guys. I hope you are enjoying the read. We do an hour of reading this book per day and hope that we will finish it in the next few weeks, I hope. We're on to chapter 53. I carried a small overnight bag containing a few personal items, plus one standard size ironing board, slugged jauntily under my arm like a surfboard. The army had ordered me to bring it. From here on, my shirts and trousers would need to be crease-free. I knew as much about operating an ironing board as I did about operating a tank. Less, actually. But that was now the army's problem. I was now the army's problem. I wished them luck. So did Pa. It was he who dropped me off at Camberley, Surrey, at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, May 2005. He stood to one side and watched me put on my red name tag, Wales, then sign in. He told reporters how proud he was, then extended his hand. "Off you go, darling boy. Photo up." Click! I was assigned to a platoon of 29 young men and women. Early the next day, after pulling on our new combats, we filed into an ancient room, hundreds of years old. You could smell the history. It seemed to come off the wood-paneled walls like steam. We recited an oath to the Queen. I swear allegiance to crown and country. The lad beside me shot an elbow into my ribs. "Bet you say Granny rather than Queen." That was the last time for the next 5 weeks that he or anyone else would venture a joke. There was nothing funny about boot camp. Boot camp, such a benign name for what happened. We were pushed to our limits, physically, mentally, spiritually. We were taken or dragged to a place beyond our limits, and then a bit further by a stolid group of lovable sadists called color sergeants. Large, loud, extremely masculine men, and yet they all had tiny little dogs. I've never heard or read an explanation for this, and I can't venture one. I'll only say that it was odd to see to see these testosterone-rich, mostly bald ogres cooing at their poodles, Shih Tzu, and pugs. Welcome to the live, guys. I'd say they treated us like dogs, except they treated their dogs so much better. With us, they never said, "There's a good boy." They got up in our faces, shouted at us through the clouds of their aftershave, and never, ever let up. They belittled us, harassed us, shrieked at us, and made no secret of their intent. They meant to break us. If they couldn't break us, brilliant. Welcome to the army. If they could, even better. Better to know now, better that they should break us than the army or the enemy. They used a variety of approaches: physical duress, psychological intimidation, and humor. I remember one color sergeant pulling me aside. "Mr. Wales, I was on guard one day at Windsor Castle wearing my bearskin, and along came a boy who kicked gravel on my shoes, and that boy was you." He was joking, but I wasn't sure I should laugh, and I wasn't sure it was true. I didn't recognize him, and I certainly didn't remember kicking gravel on any guardsman. But if it was true, I apologized and hoped we could put it behind us. Within 2 weeks, several cadets had tapped out. We woke to find their beds made, their stuff gone. No one thought less of them. This shit wasn't for everybody. Some of my fellow cadets would confess, before lights out, that they feared being next. I never did, however. I was, for the most part, fine. Boot camp was no picnic, but I never wavered in my belief that I was exactly where I was meant to be. They can't break me, I thought. Is it, I wondered, because I'm already broken? Also, no matter what they did to us, it was done away from the press. So for me, every day was a kind of holiday. The training center was like Club H. No matter what the color sergeant dished out, there was always the compensatory bonus of no paps. Nothing could really hurt me in a place where the press couldn't find me. And then they found me. A reporter from The Sun sneaked onto the grounds and shambled around, holding a phony bomb, trying to prove what? No one knew. The Sun said their reporter, this fox flaneur, was trying to expose the training center's lack security to prove that Prince Harry was in danger. The truly scary part was that some readers actually believed their rubbish. Chapter 54. Every day, upon waking at 5 a.m., we were forced to down a huge bottle of water. The bottle was army-issued black plastic, a leftover from the Boer War. Any liquid inside tasted of first-generation plastic, and piss. Plus, it was piss warm. So after the guzzling, moments before setting out on our morning run, some of us would fall to the ground and vomit the water straight back up. No matter. Next day, you had to guzzle that plastic piss water again from the same water bottle, and then get out there for another post-vomit run. Oh, the running. We ran constantly. We ran around the track. We ran along the road. We ran through deep woods. We ran across meadows. Sometimes we ran with 40 kilograms on our backs, sometimes carrying a huge log. We ran and ran and ran until we passed out, which we sometimes did while still running. We'd lie there, half conscious, legs still pumping, like sleeping dogs chasing squirrels. In between the runs, we drag our bodies up ropes, or hurl them at walls, or ram them against each other. At night, something more than pain would creep into our bones. It was a deep, shuddering throb. There was no way to survive that throb except to disassociate from it. Tell your mind that you were not it. Sunder yourself from yourself. The color sergeant said this was part of their grand plan, kill the self. Then we'd all be on the same page. Then we'd truly be one unit. As the primacy of self fades, they promise the idea of service takes order. Platoon, country, they'll be all you know, cadets, and they'd bloody well be enough. I couldn't tell how the other cadets felt about all this, but I bought in, all the way in. Self, self. I was more than ready to shed that dead weight. Identity, take it. I could understand for someone attached to their self, their identity, that this experience might be harsh, not me. I rejoiced as slowly, steadily, I felt myself being reduced to an essence, the impurities removed, only the vital stuff remaining. A little like what happened to Tulabila, only more so. It all felt like an enormous gift from the color sergeants, from the Commonwealth. I loved them for it. At night, before blacking out, I gave thanks. Welcome into the lab, guys. I hope you are enjoying the reading as much as I'm enjoying bringing it to you. We are on to chapter 55. And surprisingly, we are just about quarter way into the book. Oh, here comes the pages start popping up. Now we are on to page 110. Chapter 55. After those first few weeks, after the close of boot camp, the color sergeants eased up, ever so slightly. They didn't shout at us quite so much. They treated us like soldiers. As such, however, it was time to learn about war, how to make it, how to win it. Some of this involved stupefyingly boring classroom lessons. The better bits involved drills, assimilating different ways of being killed or not, defending. CBRN, they were called chemical, biological, radiational, and nuclear. That doesn't sound right. CBRN. My mind is going into something else, guys, that you all don't understand. CBRN, they were called chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. We practiced putting on a protective gear, pulling it off, cleaning and wiping the poisons and other muck that might be thrown, dropped, or sprayed on us. We dug countless trenches, donned masks, curled into the fetal position, rehearsed the book of Revelation over and over. One day, the color sergeant assembled us outside a red brick building, which had been turned into a CS gas chamber. They ordered us inside, activated the gas. We took off our gas masks, put them on again, took them off. If we weren't quick about it, you got a mouthful, a lungful, but you couldn't always be quick. And that was the point. So eventually, everyone sucked gas. The exercises were supposed to be about war. To me, they were about death. The whole leitmotif of army training was death. How to avoid it, but also how to face it head on. It felt natural, therefore, almost inevitable, that they put us on buses and took us to Brookwood Military Cemetery to stand on graves, to listen as someone read a poem for the fallen. The poem predated the ghastliest wars of the 20th century, so it still had a trace of innocence. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. It was still how much of our earliest training was intercut, leavened with poetry, the glory of dying, the beauty of dying, the necessity of dying. These concepts were pounded into our heads along with the skills to avoid dying. Sometimes it was explicit, but sometimes it was right in our faces. Whenever we were herded into chapel, we'd look up and see etched in stone, Dulce el decorum est pro patria mori. Guys, that's French. Please forgive me. Oh my God. But it said sweet something. Sweet is the decorum, sounds like decoration, beauty, something like that. And pro patria mori sounds like someone who was passed in death. I don't know. As we read along, they might explain it to us. But it says, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Okay. Sweet and fitting is it to die for one's country? Okay. So that's what it means, guys. Sweet and fitting it is to die for one's country. Words first written by an ancient Roman, an exile, then repurposed by a young British soldier who had died for his country. Repurposed ironically, but no one told us that. They certainly weren't etched ironically into that stone. Poetry, for me, was slightly preferable to history and psychology and military strategy. I winced just remembering those long hours, those hard chairs in Faraday Hall and Churchill Hall, reading books and memorizing dates, analyzing famous battles, writing essays on the most esoteric concepts of military strategy. These, for me, were the ultimate trials of Sandhurst. Given a choice, I'd have taken 5 more weeks at boot camp. I fell asleep in Churchill Hall more than once. You there, Mr. Wales, you were sleeping. You were advised, when feeling sleepy, to jump up, get the blood flowing, but that seemed overly confrontational. By standing, you were informing the instructor that he or she was a bore. What sort of mood would they be in when it came time to mark your next paper? Weeks ran together. In week 9, or was it 10, we learned bayoneting. Wintry morning, a field in Castlemartin, Wales. The colour sergeant put on head-splitting punk rock. These people gotta stop texting me. But anyway, let us continue. I keep getting distracted by all this text that I'm getting. The colour sergeants put on head-splitting punk rock music, full volume, to rouse our animal spirits, and then we began running at sandbag dummies, bayonets high, slashing and shouting, "Kill! Kill! Kill!" When the whistles blew, when the drill was over, some guys couldn't turn it off. They kept stabbing and stabbing their dummies. A quick glimpse into the dark side of human nature. Then we all laughed and pretended we hadn't seen what we had just seen. Week 12, or maybe 13, was guns and grenades. I was a good shot. I had been shooting rabbits and pigeons and squirrels with a 22 since I was 12. But now I got better, so much better. Chapter 56. In late summer, we were shipped to Wales and put through a punishing exercise called Long Reach, a non-stop march, jump and run over several days, up and down barren countryside, with a load of gear strapped to our backs, equivalent to the weight of one young teenager. Worst, Europe was suffering a historic heat wave. And we set out at the crest of the wave, the hottest day of the year, a Friday. We were told that the exercise would run through Sunday night. Late Saturday, during our only enforced rest, we slept in bags on a dirt track. After 2 hours, we were awakened by thunder and hard rain. I was in a team of 5, and we stood up, held our faces to the rain, drinking the drops. It felt so good, but then we were wet, and it was time to march again. Sopping wet, in driving rain, marching now became something altogether different. We were grunting, panting, groaning, slipping. Gradually, I felt my resolve start to give way. At a momentarily At a momentary stop, a checkpoint, I felt a burning in my feet. I sat on the ground, pulled off my right boot and sock, and the bottom of my foot peeled away. Trench foot, the soldier beside me shook his head. Shit, you can't go on. I was gutted, but I confess, also relieved. We were on a country road. In a nearby field stood an ambulance. I staggered towards it. As I got close, medics lifted me onto the open tailgate. They examined my feet. Each this said this march was over for me. I nodded, slumped forward. My team was getting ready to leave. Goodbye, lads. See you back at camp. But then one of our color sergeants appeared. Color Sergeant Spence. He want he asked for a word. I hopped off the tailgate, limped with him over to a nearby tree. His back to the tree. His back to the tree. He spoke to me in a level tone. It was the first time in months he hadn't shouted at me. Mr. Wells, you have got one last push. You have literally got 6 or 8 miles left. That's all. I know your feet are shit, but I suggest you don't quit. I know you can do this. You know you can do this. Push on. You'll never forgive yourself if you don't. He walked away. I limped back to the ambulance, asked for all their zinc oxide tape. I wrapped my feet tightly and rammed them back into the boots. Uphill, downhill, forward I went on, trying to think of other things to distract myself from the agony. We neared a stream. The icy water would be a blessing, I thought, but no, all I could feel were the rocks in the bed pressing against the raw flesh. The last 4 miles were among the most difficult steps I've ever taken on this planet. As we crossed the finish line, I began to hyperventilate with relief. 1 hour later, back in camp, everyone put on trainers. For the next several days, we shuffled about the barracks like old men, but proud old men. At some point, I limped up to Color Sergeant Spence, thanked him. He gave a little smile and walked away. Chapter 57. Though exhausted, though a bit lonely, I felt radiant. I was in the shape of my life. I was thinking and seeing more clearly than ever before. The feeling was not unlike that described by people who entered monastic orders. Everything felt lit up. As with monks, each cadet had his own cell. It had to be pristine at all times. Our small beds had to be made tight. Our black boots had to be bulled, shiny as wet paint. Our cell doors had to be propped open, always, even though you could close the door at night. Color guards could, and often did, walk in at any time. Some cadets complained bitterly, no privacy. That made me laugh. Privacy? What's that? At the end of each day, I'd sit in my cell, bulling my boots, spitting on them, rubbing them, making them mirrors as which I could see my shorn head. No matter what institution I landed in, it seemed a tragically bad haircut was the first order of business. Then I text Charles. I was allowed to keep my mobile for security reasons. I might tell her how things were going, tell her I missed her. Then I loan my phone to any other cadets who might want to text their girlfriends or boyfriends. Then it was lights out, no problem. I was no longer remotely afraid of the dark. Thank you for staying with me, guys. Don't forget to hit the like button and share out the live. Give me 2 seconds. I'm not gone. Let me just give me 2 seconds. Let me do something here, my friends. Give me 2 seconds. Let me do something here. Hold on a second. on a second. All right. That done. Let's get back to this. I just had to respond. To that. And now, why is my Kindle off? What's wrong with this? Oh dear Jesus. Why did my Kindle go off? Okay, here we're back. Hey, Julie, how are you doing, my sister? How are you doing? Good to see you, darling. Good to see you. Now we are still on chapter 56. No, we're on to chapter 57. Something went wrong here. Okay. Now we're moving on to chapter 58, guys. Hey, Ajabu, how you doing? How are you? Good to see you. On to chapter 58. It was now official. I was no longer Prince Harry. I was Second Lieutenant Wales of the Blues and Royals, second oldest regiment of the British Army, part of the household cavalry, bodyguards to the monarch. The passing out, as they called it, took place on April 12, 2006. On hand were Pa and Camilla, Grandpa, Tiggy, and Marco, and of course, Granny. She hadn't attended a passing out parade for decades, so her appearance was a dazzling honor. She smiled for all to see as I marched past, and Willie saluted. He was at Sanders too now, a fellow cadet. He had started after me because he had gone to university first. He couldn't resort to his typical attitude when we were sharing an institution. Couldn't pretend not to know me, or he'd be insubordinate. For one brief moment, Spare outranked Hare. Granny inspected the troops. When she came to me, she said, "Oh, hello." I smiled and blushed, and the passing out ceremony was followed by the playing of Auld Lang Syne. I don't know what's that guy. Oh, that sounds like a song. Auld Lang Syne. Don't stress it. And then the college adjutant rode his white horse up the steps of the old college. Last, there was a lunch in the old college. Granny gave a lovely speech. As the day petered out, the adults left, and the real partying began. A night of serious drinking, raucous laughter. My date was Chelsea. There was eventually a second passing out, as it were. I woke the next morning with a wide grin and a slight headache. Next stop, I said to the shaving mirror, Iraq. Specifically, southern Iraq. My unit would be relieving another unit, which had spent months doing advanced reconnaissance, dangerous work, constantly dodging roadside IEDs and snipers. In that same month, 10 British soldiers had been killed. In the previous 6 months, 40. Julie said, "I'm happy to be on the wake-up list." I'm still under my blanket though. Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm glad to see you, my sister. Don't tell me I missed all those pages. Last I was here, it was 30 something. Well, I put them in the playlist and I numbered them. I didn't number them by pages, but I numbered them by parts. So you can always go back. I'm so sorry, Sugar. I'm so sorry. But weren't you here yesterday when we read the other part? The previous. I'm sure you were. So here we are. No problem, Ajabu. I know you will catch up. Because we are now on to chapter 58. Why is this doing that? We are on to chapter 58. Let's continue. I searched my heart. I wasn't fearful. I was committed. I was eager, but also war, death, whatever. Anything was better than remaining in Britain, which was its own kind of battle. Just recently, the papers had run a story about Willie leaving a voicemail for me, pretending to be Chelsea. They had also run a story about me asking JLP for help on a Sanders research project. Both stories, for once, were true. The question was, how could the papers have known such deeply private things? It made me paranoid. Willie too. It made us reconsider Mommy's so-called paranoia, view it through a very different lens. We began to examine our inner circle, to question our most trusted friends and their friends, with whom they had begun speaking, in whom had been confided. No one was above suspicion because no one could be. We even doubted our bodyguards, and we had always worshipped our bodyguards. Hell, officials, I was now a bodyguard, the Queen's bodyguard. They had always been like big brothers to us, but now they were also suspects. For a fraction of a second, we were doubted. We even doubted Marco. That was how toxic the suspicion became. No one was above it. Some person or persons extremely close to me and Willie was sneaking stuff to the newspaper, so everyone needed to be considered. What a relief it will be, I thought, to be in a proper war zone where none of this is part of my daily calculus. Please put me on a battlefield where there are clear rules of engagement, where there's some sense of humor. And here there is a picture of him saluting. It says, bloody but unbowed. Now we are on to the book, part 2 of the book. Part 2, chapter 1 of part 2. Britain's Ministry of Defense told the world in February 2007 that I was deploying, that I would be commanding a group of light tanks along the Iraqi border near Basra. It was official. I was off to war. Public reaction was peculiar. Half of Britons were furious, calling it dreadful to risk the life of the Queen's youngest grandson. Spare or not, they said, it's unwise to send a royal into a war zone. It was the first time in 25 years that such a thing had been done. Half, however, said bravo. Why should Harry get special treatment? What a waste of taxpayers' money it would be to train the boy as a soldier and then not have him use it. If he dies, he dies, they said. The enemy certainly felt that way. By all means, said the insurgents who were trying to foment a civil war across Iraq, send us the boy. One of the insurgent leaders extended a formal invitation worthy of high tea. We are awaiting the arrival of the young, handsome, spoiled prince with bated breath. There was a plan for me, the insurgent leader said. They were going to kidnap me, then decide what to do with me. Torture, ransom, kill. In seeming different contradiction of this plan, he concluded by promising that the handsome prince would return to his grandmother without ears. I remember hearing that and feeling the tips of my ears grow warm. I flashed back to childhood when a friend suggested my ears be surgically pinned back to prevent or correct the family curse. I said flatly, no. Days later, another insurgent leader invoked my mother. He said that I should learn from her example, break away from my family, rebel against the imperialists. Break away from my family. Rebel against the imperialists, Harry, or else, he warned, a prince's blood will flow into our desert. I could have worried about Chelsea hearing any of this, but since we had begun dating, she had been so harassed by the press that she had completely unplugged. The papers didn't exist for her. The internet was off limits. The British military, however, was very plugged in. 2 months after announcing my deployment, the head of the army, General Donat, abruptly called it off. I'm sorry, guys, I'm just reading a text there. 2 months after announcing my deployment, the head of the army, General Donat, abruptly called it off. Besides the public threats from insurgent leaders, British intelligence learned that my photo had been distributed among a group of Iraqi snipers with instructions that I was the mother of the targets. These snipers were elite. They had recently cut down 6 British soldiers. So the mission had simply become too dangerous for me, for anyone who might have the bad luck to be standing next to me. I had become, in the assessment of Donat and others, a bullet magnet, and the reason, he said, was the press. In his public statement cancelling my deployment, he blasted journalists for their overwrought coverage, their wild speculations, which had exuberated the threat level. PAS staff also issued a public statement saying I was very disappointed, which was untrue. I was crushed. When word first reached me, I was at Windsor Barracks, sitting with my guys. I took a moment to collect myself, then told them the bad news. Though we had just spent months traveling, training together, during which we had become brothers in arms, they were now on their own. It wasn't simply that I felt sorry for myself. I worried about my team. Someone else would have to do my job, and I'd have to live forever with the wondering, the guilt. What if they were no good? The following week, several papers reported that I was in deep depression. One or two, however, reported that the abrupt about face in my deployment had been my own doing. The coward story again. They said that, behind the scenes, I had pressed my superiors to pull the plug. Boy, royal life is something else, I tell you. Chapter 2 of Part 2. Pondering quitting the army, what was the point of staying if I couldn't actually be a soldier? I talked it over with Chelsea. She was torn. On the one hand, she couldn't hide her relief. On the other, she knew how much I wanted to be there for my team. She knew that I had long felt persecuted by the press, and that the army had been the one healthy outlet I had found. She also knew that I believed in the mission. I talked it over with Willie. He had complicated feelings as well. He sympathized as a soldier, but as a sibling, a highly competitive older brother, he couldn't bring himself to totally regret. This turn of events. Oh my gosh. Guys, forgive me. My eyes are going ahead of my brain. Most of the time, Willie and I didn't have any truck with all that here spear nonsense. And now and then, I'd be brought up short and realize that on some level, it really did matter to him. Professionally, personally, he cared where I stood, what I was doing. Not getting comfort from any quarter, I looked for it in vodka and Red Bull, and gin and tonic. I was photographed around this time going into or coming out of multiple pubs, clubs, house parties at wee hours. I didn't love waking to find a photo of myself on the front page of a tabloid. But what I really couldn't bear was the sound of the photo being taken in the first place. That click, that terrible noise from over my shoulder or behind my back or within my peripheral vision had always triggered me, had always made my heart race. But after Sandhurst, it sounded like a gun cocking or a blade being notched open. And then, even a little worse, a little more traumatizing, came that blinding flash. Great, I thought. The army has made me more able to recognize threats, to feel threats, to become adrenalized in the face of those threats. And now it's casting me aside. I was in a bad, bad place. Pap somehow knew. Around this time, they began hitting me with their cameras. deliberately trying to incite me. They'd brush, smack, jostle, or just straight wallop me, hoping to get a rise, hoping I'd retaliate, because that would create a better photo and thus more money in their pockets. A snap of me in 2007 fetched about £30,000 down payment on a flat, but a snap of me doing something aggressive. That might be a down payment on a house in the countryside. I got into one scrap that became big news. I came away with a swollen nose, and my bodyguards were livid. You made those pups rich, Harry. You're happy? Happy? No, I said. No, I'm not happy. The pups had always been grotesque people, but as I reached maturity, they were worse. You could see it in their eyes, their body language. They were more emboldened, more radicalized, just as young men in Iraq had been radicalized. Their mullahs were editors, the same ones who had vowed to do better after Mommy died. The editors promised publicly to never again send photographs chasing after people, and now, 10 years later, they were back to their old ways. They justified it by no longer sending their own photographers directly. Instead, they contracted with pap agencies who sent the photographers, a distinction without a shred of difference. The editors were still inciting and handsomely rewarding thugs and losers to stalk the royal family or anyone else unlucky enough to be deemed famous or newsworthy. Hey, Winsome, how is everything going? And no one seemed to give a shit. I remember leaving a club in London and being swarmed by 20 paps. They surrounded me, then surrounded the police car in which I was sitting, threw themselves across the bonnet, all wearing football scarves around their faces and hoods over their heads. The uniform of terrorists everywhere. It was one of the scariest moments of my life, and I knew no one cared. Prince, you pay, people would say, though I never understood what they meant. Prince, I'm sorry, guys. The price you pay, people would say, though I never understood what they meant. Price for what? I was particularly close to one of my bodyguards, Billy. I called him Billy the Rock because he was so solid, so dependable. He once pounced on a grenade someone tossed at me from a crowd. Luckily, it turned out not to be a real one. I promised Billy I wouldn't push any more paps. But neither could I just stroll into their ambushes. So, when we left the club, I said, "You're going to have to stuff me into the boot of the car, Billy." He looked at me, wide-eyed. Really? That's the only way I won't be tempted to have a go at them, and they won't be able to make any money out of me. Win-win. I didn't tell Billy that this was something my mother used to do. Thus began a very strange routine between us. When leaving a pub or club in 2007, I'd have the car pull into a back alley or underground parking lot, climb into the boot, and let Billy shut the lid. And I'd lie there in the dark, hands across my chest, while he and another bodyguard ferried me home. It felt like being in a coffin. I didn't care. Chapter 3 of Part 2. To mark the 10th anniversary of our mother's death, Willie and I organized a concert in her honor. The proceeds would go to her favorite charities and to a new charity I just launched, Centerville. Its mission, the first against HIV in Lesotho, particularly among children. Centerville is the Sesotho word for forget-me-not, Mommy's favorite flower. While planning the concert, Willie and I were emotionless. All business. It's the anniversary. We need to do this. There are a million details, full stop. The venue had to be big enough, Wembley Stadium, and the tickets had to be priced right, £45, and the entertainers had to be A-list. Elton John, Duran Duran, P. Diddy, But on the night of the event, standing backstage, looking out at all those faces, feeling that pulsing energy, that pent up love and longing for a mother, we crumbled. Then Elton walked across the stage. He seated himself at a grand piano, and the place went mad. I'd asked him to sing Candle in the Wind, but he said no. He didn't want to be morbid. He chose instead your song. I hope you don't mind that I put down in words how wonderful life is while you are in the world. He sang it with a twinkle and a smile, aglow with good memories. Willie and I tried for the same energy, but then Mummy's photo began flashing on the screen, each one more radiant. We went from being crumbled to being swept away. As the song ended, Elton jumped up, introduced us, Their Royal Highnesses Prince William and Prince Harry. The applauses were deafening, like nothing we had ever heard. We had been applauded in the streets, at polo games, parades, operas, but never in a place that this cavernous or in a context this charged. Willie walked out. I followed, each of us wearing a blazer and open shirt, as if going to a school dance. We were both frightfully nervous. On any topic, but especially on the topic of Mummy, we weren't accustomed to public speaking. In fact, we weren't accustomed to private speaking about her either. But standing before 65,000 people and another 500 million watching live in 140 countries, we were paralyzed. Maybe that was the reason we didn't actually say anything. I look at the video now and it's striking. Here was a moment, maybe the moment, for us to describe her, to dig down deep and find the words to remind the world of her sterling qualities, her once in a millennium magic, her disappearance, but we didn't. I'm not suggesting a full-blown homage was in order, but maybe some small personal tribute. We offered no such thing. It was still too much, too raw. The only thing I said that was real, that came from my heart, was a shout out to my team. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say hi to all the guys in A Squadron, Household Cavalry, who are serving out in Iraq at the moment. I wish I was there with you. I'm sorry I can't be, but to you and everybody else on operations at the moment, we'd both like to say, stay safe. Chapter 4. Days later, I was in Botswana with Chels. We went to stay with Tej and Mike. Addie was there too. The first convergence of those four special people in my life. It felt like bringing Chels home to meet Mom and Dad and Big Brother. Major steps we all knew. Luckily, Tej and Mike and Aldi loved her, and she saw how special they were too. One afternoon, as we were all getting ready to go for a walk, Tej started nagging me. Bring a hat. Yeah. And sunscreen, lots of sunscreen. Spike, you are going to fry with that pale skin. All right, Spike. Okay, Mom. It just flew out of my mouth. I heard it and stopped. Tej heard it and stopped, but I didn't correct myself. Tej looked shocked, but also moved. I was moved as well. Thereafter, I called her Mom all the time. It felt good for both of us, though I made a point always to call her Mom rather than Mum. You get it? Mom rather than Mum. There was only one Mum. A happy visit overall, and yet there was a constant subtext of stress. It was evident of how much I was drinking. At one point, Chelsea and I took a boat, drifted up and down the river, and the main thing I remember is Southern Comfort and Sambuca. Sambuca gold by day, Sambuca black by night. I remember walking into the morning with my face stuck to I remember waking in the morning with my face stuck to a pillow, my head now feeling like it was fastened to my neck. I was having fun, sure, but also dealing in my own way with unsorted anger and guilt about not being at war, not leading my lads, and I wasn't dealing well. Chelsea and Addie, Tish and Mike said nothing. Maybe they saw nothing. I was probably doing a pretty good job of covering it all up. From the outside, my drinking probably looked like a party. And that was what I told myself it was. But deep down, on some level, I knew something had to change. I knew I couldn't go on like this. So the moment I got back to Britain, I asked for a meeting with my commanding officer, Colonel Ed Smith Osborne. I admired Colonel Ed, and I was fascinated by him. He wasn't put together like other men. Come to mention it, he wasn't put together like any other human I'd encountered. The basic ingredients were different: scrap iron, steel wool, lion's blood. He looked different too. His face was long, like a horse's, but not equine smooth. He had a distinguished tuft of hair on each cheek. His eyes were large, calm, capable of wisdom and stoicism. My eyes, by contrast, were still bloodshot from my Okavango debug and darting all around as I delivered my pitch. Colonel, I need to find a way of getting back onto operations, or else I'm going to have to quit the army. I'm not certain Colonel Ed believed my threat. I'm not certain I did. Still, politically, diplomatically, strategically, he couldn't afford to discount it. A prince in the ranks was a big public relations asset, a powerful recruitment tool. He couldn't ignore the fact that if I bolted, his superiors might blame him, and their superiors too, and up the chain it might go. On the other hand, much of what I saw from him that day was genuine humanity. The guy got it. As a soldier, he felt for me. He shuddered at the thought of being kept from a scrap. He really did want to help. Harry, there might be a way. Iraq was permanently off the table, he said. Alas, no two ways about that, I'm afraid. But maybe, he added, Afghanistan was an option. I squinted. Afghanistan? He muttered something about it being the safer option. Right, safer. What on earth was he banging on about? Afghanistan was worlds more dangerous than Iraq. At that moment, Britain had 7,000 soldiers in Afghanistan, and each day found them engaged in some of the fiercest combat since the Second World War. But who was I to argue? If Colonel Ed thought Afghanistan was safer, and if he was willing to send me there, great. What job would I do in Afghanistan, Colonel? FAC, Forward Air Controller. I blinked. Highly sought after job, he explained. FACs were tasked with orchestrating all air power, giving cover to lads on the ground, calling in raids, not to mention rescues. Medivacs, the list goes on. It wasn't a new job, certainly, but it was newly vital in this new sort of warfare. Why is that, sir? Because the bloody Taliban is everywhere and nowhere. You simply couldn't find them, he explained. Terrain was too rugged, too remote, mountains and deserts, honeycombed with tunnels and caves. It was like hunting goats or ghosts. You had to get the bird's eye view. Since the Taliban had no air force, not one plane, that was easy. We British, plus the Yanks, owned the air, but FACs helped us press that advantage. Say a squadron out on patrol needed to know about nearby threats. The FAC checked with drones, checked with fighter pilots, checked with helicopters, checked his high-tech laptop, created a 360-degree picture of the battlefield. Say that same quadrant suddenly came upon fire. The FAC consulted a menu: Apache, Tornado, Mirage, F-15, F-16, A-10, and ordered up the aircraft best suited to the operation or the best one available, then guided that aircraft onto the enemy using cutting edge hardware. FACs didn't simply rain fire on the enemy's heads, they placed it there like a crown. Then he told me that all FACs get a chance to go up in the Hawk and experience being in the air. By the time Colonel Ed stopped talking, I was salivating. FAC it is, sir. When do I leave? Not so fast, not so fast. FAC was a plum job. Everyone wanted it, so that would take some doing. Also, it was a complex job. All that technology and responsibility required loads of training. First things first, he said. I'd have to go through a challenging certification process. Where, sir? At RAF Leeming. In the Yorkshire Dales? Chapter 5. That one ended on a question suddenly. Early autumn, dry stone walls, patchwork fields, sheep smashing on grassy slopes, dramatic limestone cliffs and crags and crees. In every direction, another beautiful purple moor. The landscape wasn't quite so famous as the Lake District, just over to the west, but it was still breathtaking and still inspired some of the great artists in British history. Wordsworth, for one, I'd managed to avoid reading that old gent stuff in school, but now I thought he must be pretty damn good if he spent time around these parts. It felt like sacrilege to be standing on a cliff above this place and trying to obliterate it. Of course, it was pretend obliteration. I didn't actually blow up one single dale. Still, at the end of each day, I felt I had. I was studying the art of destruction, and the first thing I learned was that destruction is particularly creative. It brings with imagination. Before destroying, sometimes you have to imagine it destroyed, and I was getting very good at imagining the Dales as a smoking hellscape. The drill each day was the same. Rise at dawn, glass of orange juice, a bowl of porridge, then a full English, then head into the fields. At first, daylight poured over the horizon. I'd begin speaking to an aircraft, usually a Hawk. The aircraft would reach its IP, initial point, 5 to 8 nautical miles away, and then I'd give the target, signal the run. The aircraft would turn and commence. I'd talk it through the sky, over the countryside, using different landmarks, L-shaped wood, T-shaped dike, silver barn. In selecting landmarks, I'd been instructed to start big, move on to something medium, then pick something small. Picture the world, I was told, as a hierarchy. Welcome into the live, guys. This is the reading of Spear by Prince Harry. Thank you so much for coming. If you have not yet hit the like button and share out the live. We are going to go until just under an hour and a half. And I do just under an hour and a half because when it hit the hour and a half mark, I noticed that YouTube puts the monetization sign in yellow. So I usually stay right under 1.5. Okay? Hierarchy, you say? Think I can handle that? Each time I called out a landmark, the pilot would say, back, affirm. Or else I was visual. I am visual. I like that. I enjoyed the rhythms, the poetry, the meditative chant of it all, and I found deeper meaning in the exercise. I'd often think it's the whole game, isn't it? Getting people to see the world as you see it and say it all back to you. Typically, the pilot would be flying low, 500 feet off the deck, level with the rising sun. But sometimes I'd send him lower and put him into a pop-up as he streaked towards me at the speed of sound. He'd pull back, shoot upwards at a 45-degree angle. Then I'd begin a new series of descriptions, new details. As he reached the top of his climb and rolled his wings, as he leveled and started to feel negative G force, he had seen the world just as I'd painted it, then swooped down. Suddenly he'd cry out, "Tally target!" Then, "I'm dry!" Then I'd say, "Clear dry," meaning his bombs were but spirits melting into air. Damn, I almost felt myself in a war right there. I almost felt a bomb coming over me. Then I'd wait, listening keenly for his pretend explosions. The weeks just flew by. All right, guys, we are at chapter 6. Let me see if I can finish chapter 6 in 4 minutes. Chapter 6. Once I was a trained FAC, I had to become combat ready, which meant mastering 28 different combat controls. A control was basically an interaction with an aircraft. Each control was a scenario, a little play. For instance, imagine two aircraft come into your airspace. "Good morning, this is Dude 01 and Dude 02. We are a pair of F-15s with 2 PGMs on board, plus 1 JDAM. We have got a playtime of 90 minutes, and we are currently 2 nautical miles east of your location at flight level 150, waiting for talk on." I needed to know precisely what they were saying and how to respond to them precisely in their own jargon. Sadly, I wouldn't be able to do this in a normal training area. The normal areas, like Salisbury Plain, were too out in the open. Someone would see me and tip off the press, and my cover would be blown. I'll be back where I started. Instead, Colonel Ed and I decided that I should learn the controls somewhere remote, somewhere like Sandringham. We both smiled when the thought occurred, then laughed. The last place anyone would think of Prince Harry getting himself combat ready, Granny's country estate. I got a room at a small hotel near Sandringham, Knight's Hill. I'd known the place all my life, driven past it a million times. Whenever we visited Granny at Christmas, our bodyguards would sleep there. Standard room, 100 gid. In summers, Knight's Hill tended to be full of bird watchers, wedding parties, but now in the autumn it was empty. The privacy was thrilling and would have been total if not for the older lady in the pub connected to the hotel. She watched me, goggle-eyed, every time I passed. Alone, almost anonymous, my existence narrowed to one interesting task. I was delirious. I tried not to say so to Chelsea when I phoned her in the evenings, but it was the kind of happiness that's hard to hide. I recall one difficult chat. What were we doing? Where were we heading? She knew I cared about her, but she felt unseen. I was not visual. She knew how desperate I was to go to war. How could she not forgive my being a bit detached? I was taken aback. I explained that this was what I needed to do, the thing I'd wanted to do all my life, and I needed to do it with all my heart and soul. If that meant there was less heart and soul left over for anything or anyone else, well, I was sorry. That's the end of chapter 7 of part 2 of the book Spare, written by Prince Harry. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Until next time, my friends, this is Trev from Trevessence, where your journey matters. See you all later, guys.